welcome back to the SmiteWorks channel. This is David, and today we're going to review the Illusionist class in Castles and Crusades. So, this is going to be a tough one. In the past, I've read many articles and saw many videos about illusion spells and the Illusionist class with other versions of Dungeons and Dragons. And the basis of most of those articles are based on the fact that they are tricks of the mind. There are illusions if you believe it or not, if it becomes real or not. And it's always been a little confusing because it's really up to the DM. It's the Dungeon Master's call of the results of the spell. And so the player doesn't feel like they really have full control over their class or their spell capability because of that. And I think over the years, Illusionists were not as popular as they should have been because players were afraid to play them, or they're too much of a pain. And on the flip side of the coin is Dungeon Masters felt the same way. They didn't want to deal with it, and so a lot of DMs will rule that there's no Illusionists in their campaign. So what I think is interesting about Castles or Crusades is how they present it a little bit differently. C&C prides itself on how you can run the game the way you want to run it. The way the books are written shows that you can run the game any way you want to. But even so, the way they wrote it gives it a little bit more meat and a little bit more clarification of how these spells work. And on top of that, they added a lot more spells to the class. And so now the Illusionist is a separate class from Wizard, and they do not share a lot of the same spells. They share some of the spells, like the common ones like Detect Magic and Read Magic, but most of the other spells are completely different. They're a spell of their own on their own Illusionist spell list. And we'll go over all that in this video, but if I went over every spell in the book, this video would be like 3 or 4 hours long. So I'm going to try to review them quickly in bulk and point out the differences of the different kind of spell types. Because if in the CK book, a chapter on the Illusionist magic, further clarification. And then, of course, in the Player's Handbook, there's a whole chapter, as you can see on the screen, just for Illusionists. And I think if anybody were to, at first glance, read this class here in the Player's Handbook, it's a little bit misleading. It starts to talk like it's all trickery, it's all in the mind. But then later on in the same book, it points out the real differences, the real tangible differences of what illusion magic really is, which is not just trickery of the mind. And it's kind of cool how they work that out in the game. And then the CK guide actually goes into more detail. We're going to go ahead and review the chapter. I will paraphrase some parts, not read the entire thing, because that would be boring. But I want to paraphrase lines and kind of comment on it and kind of put it together, because unless you pick this apart and then analyze it, then you'll get a firmer grasp of what the intentions of this class is. And one thing I want to point out, though, right away, and I heard a lot of comments on this, is the name of the class is misleading. It goes back to the AD&D first edition where they had the class, and you would expect in any kind of version of D&D there would be this class, the name Illusionist. But after reading all this, I really think that this name is misleading. I think it should they should have a better name for this class, a more descriptive name, because the kind of magic that this class uses is quite different than previous versions of D&D. And I'll put that out here when we go look this over. And I know, it's hard not to use the name Illusionist because players expect that class to be in the book. And so, of course, they had to use that name. But I think the name doesn't give the class justice of what it really is. So let's go ahead and look at it. So the first thing, of course, I want to point out at the very beginning, Illusionist spells tend to baffle and confuse players and castle keepers alike. See, right there, first sentence. It is confusing. But this book does a very good job of clearing that up. The source of the illusion is often confusing as the illusion itself. The word illusion itself seems to connote the magic user's magic is purely illusionary, unreal, meaning a strong or schooled mind can see through that illusion's trickery, admonitions, and entirely ignore its effect. And that's what previous versions of Illusionists pointed out over the years, is that's what you would expect. And coming into this game, you would think that's how this class would be. You'd think that this class would be handled, but it's not. But that's not the case. So we'll continue here. So yet you could not be more wrong. Some of the illusions are in fact simple illusions, and I'll go through the spells and point some of those out. That the ones that are simple illusions, and others are the mind's conquest over matter, and other spells are channeled magic displayed with such force that they conjure elements as real as the wizard's magic missile spell or the cleric's spiritual weapon. So right there in the first paragraph, I pointed out 3 types of illusion class spells. Real quick. I went ahead and created a spreadsheet of all the spells so I can help categorize them and give them illusion types. I added some crowd control list here, just that way to help the illusion, to point out the spells that actually control the battlefield. That's just one way of playing the game. And some people like to have that information. I did it for my player in my game. But let's go back to the player's handbook. Okay, so that's a good start right there. The Illusionist is a magic user class. It's a class description. It's a journalized word establishing distance from the wizard. So they want to point out that Illusionist is not a trickster. Because I've seen a lot of YouTube videos over the years and articles written in Dragon Magazine how it talks about illusionist spells, and how it's kind of a trickery of the mind. In this version of Illusionist in CNC, the illusionist has no skills to allow him to fool or trick his targets into believing something that isn't there. Let's continue farther down. The illusionist is a master of magic, bending his back in years of study to raise the level of the beginner of his craft. Of course, all wizards are that way. The illusionist is a master of time and substance. His abilities transcend simple illusions of a trickery that the illusionist conjures material from the essence of the world around him. So they're not simple parlor tricks to fool the weak of mind, but they are powerful incantations drawing upon the powerful mind. So he weaves those musings with magic drawn from the world around him, therefore fabricating the very stuff of reality. Illusionist can literally create something from nothing. So that's the introductory of Illusionist in the Player's Handbook. So we'll continue to the next page of 72 in the Player's Handbook. That the illusionist is a master of magic, and he bends his back in years of study to rise to the level of even a beginner in his craft, just like a wizard, like you would expect. The illusionist is a master of time and substance. His abilities transcend the simple illusions of trickery. Rather, the illusionist conjures material from the essence of the world around him. There's always these articles about questions asking where does magic come from in D&D or CK or CNC, like particularly about wizards. Some people believe in your game world you could have it draw from the different planes of existence. Some game worlds have the magic drawn from the air around them, kind of like in Star Wars, the Force. But in this case, that's what they're saying. The essence of the world around him. He pulls in the power. His illusions are not simple parlor tricks to fool the weak of mind, but are powerful incantations drawing upon the powerful mind. He draws this from his own power, from his own mind. So he weaves these musings with magic drawn from the world around him, fabricating the very stuff of reality. So illusions can literally create something from nothing. That's not an illusion. That's not a trick. So you gotta get this in your head from the very beginning, because the way these spells are written, that the illusionist's mind can actually use magic, pull in magic from his environment from around him, and shape it and create something from nothing, an object, a force, tangible items. The misconception that the class and its abilities is a trickster, but that's not true. Some of the spells are that way, and I'll point them out in the spreadsheet on the spell list. Like some of the illusion spells are hypnotic. Many if not most of the illusion spells are real, tangible effects regardless whether or not the victim believes or not. So there are spells that way as well. Oh, then it goes on about how the Illusionist is not a less than adequate mage because it's not just trickery of the mind. He does wield powerful sorcery. He's summoning and shaping the world around him like no other, bringing life reality created by his own mind. So, I can see that when you're reading this for the first time and you haven't read the whole thing yet, you got this in your head about what an illusionist is. And so when you're reading this, you read it with that frame of mind and you kind of wave it off like, yeah, okay, I know what an illusionist is. It's more of the same, maybe a little bit different. Okay, they have more spells. And that's what I thought when I first glanced at this chapter. And so I knew there was something more going on here, so I just sat down and went through it very carefully. And then I read every spell and wrote them all down. And then I started realizing the real difference here. They do have a little warning at the bottom of the chapter that says the castle keepers cannot have a too literal definition of the illusionist. And I guess that's what this video is doing. I am trying to create a literal definition of the illusionist, but I think it needs help explaining. But you do got to keep that in mind, though, that I think this chapter is more guidelines, more than actual hardcore rules. But I think you should understand these first before you make your own version or your own rulings. So you can make rulings from intelligent investigation. So doing so kills the usefulness and the creative potential of the class itself. As many things in the C&C game, just like all the other rules. The CK and player must think outside the box. So the following section details 4 different interpretations of illusions. They say there's 4. They actually detail that in the CK guide, which I'll get to in a minute. So these might apply to only a few spells or all of them as the game requires. So you gotta just take this information with you into your rulings of these spells. So then they also point out you should consult with your player. If you don't consult with your player in these things, they're gonna that belief that the player doesn't have any control, like the old days, and they have to rely on the Dungeons Master's temperament and ruling at the time. During that session, whether or not the Dungeon Master is going to be cool or not, let him get away with something or not. There's a whole thing about consistency too, which is another reason why I made this video, because I think this would help with consistency. So that way the player and the Dungeon Master is on the same page. Go on there. And then there's a section about illusion and healing. And this take is a little different too. So it even says it. C&C has taken a whole unique approach to illusionary magic and making the illusion real. This is not because of the weakness of the target, not because of the inability to discern the real from the unreal. This power comes from the illusionist himself. The more powerful the illusionist, the greater the impact the illusions and his spells can have on the game. The illusion is an actual spellcaster capable of manipulating the world around him. Then logic and the enterprising player eventually arrive at the healer's door. Well, that's an introductory to this section on healing. So, the illusionist can heal damage. They heal damage in the same manner in which they cause damage. Not by tricking the mind or the target, but rather by projecting their own magic power into the target and changing the nature of time and substance. That sounds like a wizard. That's not trickery of the mind or illusionists trying to trick somebody like they used to think about old illusionists in previous versions. The power of the illusionist does not reside in the target. So, the illusionist power solely resides inside the illusionist. Illusionists heal through their own magic, while clerics channel magic of a deity, serving as a bridge between the deity and the target. The illusionist channels and controls the nature. An illusionist channels or controls the natural magic of the world around him, using the target's own mind as a bridge between the magic and the target. This is how it's worded. If you come into this chapter with your own thoughts about what Illusionist is, you can just kind of skim over it and not really realize what it's really saying here. So what it stated is the natural magic around the Illusionist channels the natural music. The Illusionist channels and controls the magic around him. He only uses the target's mind to channel that magic to the target. He's not trying to trick that mind into thinking he's being healed, but he's actually being healed by real magic. Okay, so that's pretty much everything the Player's Handbook had to say about it. I'm going to go ahead and make my way down to the spell list. Okay, so this is the Player's Handbook, and they do get 0 level spells, and there's 12 of them, and most of them are identical to the Wizard class. The only cantrip on this spell list that the Wizard doesn't have, I think, is Influence. It's like a charm spell, charm person spell. 0 level. That's really powerful. So that's interesting. We'll look at that later. Oh, and Dragon Mark. And it actually creates a sound of a dragon on the other side of a door. And those are pretty useful and interesting. And then, of course, you got all these first level spells, 20 of them. And as you notice, some of them are the same as Wizard. And some of them I did classify as arcane spells. But I did classify some of these others as hypnotic or mental or plasmic. But I'll show you that in my spread list sheet after this. So I went through all these spells, and there's quite a few of them. Let me go to finish level 2 here. So level 2 has 20. Level 3 has 20. Level 4 has 20. Level 5 has 20. That's a lot of spells. Let's go back to the beginning here. Okay, so it's an impressive set of spells, and a lot of these are really unique and different. Let's go over to the Castle Keeper's Guide here. And what they did here is they actually classified the different types of illusion spells. So on page 50 of the CK guide, the first 4 paragraphs is identical to what's in the Player's Handbook, so you can skip that. So let's go to page 51. And the next 2 paragraphs are the same. They just copied everything, all the way down to the classifications. So all these paragraphs down to photonic are identical to the Player's Handbook. So photonic, they classified 4. If you wanted to, you could probably create a 5th classification. I've been looking at these for a week trying to figure these out. So you got photonic, plasmic, hypnotic, and mental. Let me show you my spreadsheet again real quick. So I went through these and I got all the 2nd levels and all the 3rd levels, and I did some of the 4th, and I stopped there. I did this mostly for the player in my group, not just for him, but I needed it for myself as a CK, because I want to set expectations and keep consistency in the game. So I felt like this would be beneficial. Yeah, the description is the same as the Player's Handbook at the beginning, and then I added little comments at the end, which you can't see, but if I click it, see what it says. Little comments here that I thought might be relevant to the spell. So as you can see, the illusion types are all set here. This is as best as I can determine. They're probably not exact. If I go through these again, I might modify a few of them, think about it further. So let's go through these real quick. Let's go back to the CK guide. So photonic. Reading this is confusing. It does give 2 examples of 2 spells though, so that helped as a baseline. So I created my own notes based on that paragraph. Let's see what I wrote here. The first thing I noticed about this paragraph is it doesn't really talk about whether or not the target gets a saving throw or not. After reading 4 levels of spells, I determined that, yes, depending on the spell, they do get a saving throw. So I got that in our heads here. Another thing I want to point out with this is I wrote down that illusions composed are solely of light. So that's kind of a simple sentence. They're composed or made of light. Well, in my mind, what it really says is these are illusions, visual illusions. It creates an image, like a holodeck on Star Trek. The sighted creatures can perceive the image, and intelligent creatures should be able to quickly determine its nature. So I just kind of want to use the Star Trek holodeck example, I suppose. So it points out in this paragraph that the creature has to be sighted. It has to be able to see. So that will eliminate and rule out some monsters, I suppose. And then certain intelligent creatures should be able to quickly determine its nature. That's just a sentence that says, if you look at the spells, they tell you if you need to save or not in the spell description. So in my mind, if this is an illusion of sight and sound, which I'll get to in a minute here, because it does talk about that sometimes these spells get a saving throw. And that means they can see through the illusion. And in fact, if you look at the spell description down here, it says right here, higher, mid, and higher level spells, I had to add that word in here to give you a context. At middle to higher level spells, the caster must be able to support the visual the caster can support that illusion with adding sound, smell, or even tactile characteristics to the illusion. And I found some spells that do match this description, and so I classified them as photonic. It does say that a saving throw does not apply to the photonic illusion, because another thing it points out is this cannot do any harm. The illusion itself cannot do any harm, but it could cause harm by like covering up a pit or something, and then walk into the pit. So basically, it's just an image, and some of the more advanced versions of this spell does have sound. And also tactile, that means you can feel them. I think I classified hallucinatory terrain as this, but we'll look at that in a minute. Okay, next, Plasmic. So these are real. These are physical. This is physical spell. Any spell that can create an item is Plasmic. What I wrote about this is they can get a save. And I'll have to look at the paragraph. And they're physical in nature. They're composed of ectoplasmatic substance. It takes form of a physical substance. And some examples is minor creation and fog cloud. Well, the reason they say fog cloud is because the particles in the air that comprises of the fog, that's a substance. So let's see what it says here in the paragraph, though. At the next column, it says, these types of illusions are real because they have physical substance, while the cloud has a physical substance. So any spell that has anything to do with clouds or even light, I classified them as Plasmic. So they can cause physical harm. Much not like the photonic, which can't cause physical harm because it's just an image, an illusion. So you can create things like weapons, a tent, or a rope, anything that's real, because you can take that weapon and fight with it, and it will cause harm. That's why it says that. At higher levels, though, the more powerful spells that I found, they can create objects which simulate different characteristics, like a lantern, oil, food, water. They can provide real sustenance. That means you can create a hot dog and eat it, and it'll fill you up and keep you alive. Or create water and drink it. So this spell literally creates objects out of nothing. Kind of like the replicator on Star Trek. Illusions of this type cannot simulate a void like a pit. It can't create nothing. It also cannot create passageways either. So, the examples were minor, creation, and fog cloud. So that's why I got that classified as. Next, hypnotic. These type of illusions only exist in the mind of those affected by the magic. This is one of those. This is the trickery category. that I placed. So any spells I found in the spell book that they get a savings throw for, that they get a savings throw or they disbelieve it, I classified those as hypnotic. And the notes I have for that is they get a save. They exist only in the believer's mind, so they do have to have a mind. Illusions only exist in the mind of those affected by the magic. A character believing he has taken enough damage to die will die of shock, but he will have no real wounds. So that means anybody else witnessing this won't see this. Only the player will think he sees it. Only the player will think it's happening to him, and he's the only one that will see it. As soon as the belief in the illusion ends, the character realizes the damage isn't real, and he regains all the hit points he lost because of that illusion. So a couple of examples was Hypnotic Pattern. So this is a little tricky. I had to go back and forth on a lot of the spells on this category. So one of the reasons why I created this video is to point out that most or not all the illusion spells aren't just hypnotic. They're not just tricks of the mind. And this category is basically what everybody thought of illusionist magic was for decades through all versions of D&D. Let's go ahead and pick out this paragraph to see what I can point out here. You can't pass through physical barriers. But you can pick up objects and create traps, or monsters can cause damage. So, yeah, to do that, it's just a trick of the mind. The believer thinks he fell into a trap, or he thinks that monster that he's seeing only in his mind is doing damage. However, these things can only exist in his mind. Any damage taken is perceived to be physical. So if he eats illusionary food, he starves to death, but he thinks his belly is full. He may die from shock. So as soon as he realizes it's a trick of the mind, it's an illusion, that the damage isn't real, he gets his hit points back. And of course, if he successfully defeats the belief in the illusion, he can convince others of its illusionary nature. So an example is Hypnotic Pattern. This is tough because it's really just not enough here in this paragraph to categorize spells. And I had some trouble doing that. I went back and forth on a lot of them. So then the last one's mental. And this one's tough too, because there's, as you can see, there's this whole paragraph plus the next page. All the way down to here. And their example was Color Spray and Magic Missile. So let's see what I wrote about this. At first it says you get no save, but I found some spells where you do get a save. So that's why I was going back and forth. So this category is the same, it's really close to hypnotic, because this only exists in the believer's mind, again, just like hypnotic. The illusionist projects his power into that mind, causing the target's own belief to actually break his own bones and split open his flesh. I classified Cure Light Wounds as mental, because you can use the magic to heal him. So mental illusions cause real physical damage. Mental magic to derive its power through the illusion's ability to channel his magic and manipulate the world around him through his target. So this is hard to wrap your head around. The actual paragraph in the book states that that what makes the mental illusion different from the hypnotic one is the nature of the spell effects. So when you're looking at the spells, you have to examine the spell effects to determine if this is a mental or hypnotic. Hypnotic illusions can only damage the psyche. You know, he thinks it's happening, so it happens in his own mind. But once he disbelieves that damage, the damage goes away. Mental illusions cause real physical damage, like Magic Missile. And even after the target realizes the attack was only an illusion, he still got damaged. He still has the damage. Mental illusions do not affect mindless creatures, like mold. The target belief in the illusion is so strong that his own mind causes the damage. But the illusionist, of course, is the source of this damage. He channels the magic of his craft through the target's mind and psyche. The target's psyche itself is a conduit for the magic. So it's kind of a different way of looking at it. You know, the illusionist draws in his powers from his surroundings, channels that power through that believer's mind, and that's what causes the damage. It's not the mind tricking itself doing the damage like a hypnotic. Hypnotic, he's tricking himself thinking he's getting damaged. And as soon as he disbelieves the damage, it's not real, and so he's not damaged anymore. But mental is totally different. The illusionist is channeling actual power from around him into that believer's mind and causing real physical damage, and that damage won't go away just because he disbelieved it. And you'll see a lot of these spells categorized in the player's handbook if they have a save or not, like Magic Missile. So the Magic Missile would be mental. The illusion projects his power into the mind, causing the target's own belief to actually break down his own bones and split open his own flesh. And then there's another comment here that physical effects of mental attacks should not be limited to causing damage. After all, if the character's own mind actually caused wounds to the body because of the illusionary attack, then it stands to reason, and maintains a sense of consistency, balance, and fair play, that the character's own mind can heal those same wounds if he were the recipient of the healing spell. So that's why Cure Light Wounds is considered mental. So anything the mind can do, it can undo. Treat other types of effects the same way. So, if the character believes there's a bridge over a bottomless pit, then his mind will carry him safely across the bridge. You know, that's a simple sentence. You gotta take it into context, what it's saying, and what we read previously. He can't do that with Hypnotic. You can't create a portal or a bridge across a pit. But you gotta remember, with mental, the illusionist is pulling in the power around him, channeling that power through that target's mind, and then the spell takes effect, the power of the spell, so it creates that bridge. So if the believer thinks he can grow wings out of his back, then his own mind will give him power of flight. See, that's misworded too. I talked to the Troll Lord guys, and they said they're going to be rewording some of this stuff for the next version of this book. So hopefully they reword this paragraph, because it's a little confusing. So from what I gather from reading all this material, that since it's mental, the illusionist is pulling in all the power around him, channeling that magical power through that target's mind, and then those wings will grow, physical wings will grow and actually work, and he will be able to fly. Everybody's going to be able to see this, and they're going to be real physical wings. Okay, so what I did is I created a spreadsheet for this, and I can kind of go over it just a little bit. Let's see if I can remember some of the stuff. So the first one was Dancing Lights, which is a wizard spell. But there's an extra rule in the spell description for Illusionist. It says that creatures that interacts with Dancing Lights get a wisdom save. It's a wisdom savings throw to recognize it as an illusion. That's why I gave it photonic, because it's visual. It doesn't do any damage. You can't interact with it. So that's why I classified that. Dragon Mark is hypnotic because the target on the other side of the door can hear, smell, and feel the ground rumble as a dragon. So I placed that as hypnotic. First aid is like Cure Light Wounds. That's why it's classified as mental. The reason it says intelligent save there is because if you read the spell description, the target can reject it if they don't want to be healed. And I don't know why they would not want to be healed, but there could be some role-playing reasons why they don't want to be healed. Also, some of these spells are reversible, like Cause Light Wounds, so another reason why there's a save. And so we got all these classifications here. Let's see what other things can I comment on. So moving down to first level spells, I see that they're pretty much a little bit of everything here. Photonic, mental, arcane. I went ahead and I classified Erase as arcane because that's a basic wizard arcane spell used for study. So I kept it arcane, one of the very few. And another one is Read Magic. The rest are based on illusions or magic control with the mind as a target. So what's the takeaway of this? You know, what's the purpose of this? What value does this give to the CK and the players? I think if there's ever a question that comes up at the table, whether or not if the spell effect is illusionary in nature, that's a trickery of the mind, this will actually help. Okay, what's the takeaway from all this? Well, we examined what the CK guide and the player's handbook said. I made a list of spells and looked them all over and read every description. I categorized them. The usefulness of this is probably only in adjudicating some of the spell effects with the player in the group. And I think the one thing that probably is really useful here is trying to see which spells are actually physical with no save, and that there's no chance of anybody disbelieving the spell. So some spells are that way. It's not going to be a general rule that we always believed in the past where all these spells can be disbelieved or not. And in actuality, the spell descriptions do go over some of this. It does mention whether or not the players will get a save or not, or the monsters. But the one thing I noticed that helped me learn more about these spells is the damage spells. I thought that was fascinating because you can't disbelieve some of these damage spells because the way the chapter described how these spells worked. They're actual physical damage, just like a wizard. So I think that's the real only takeaway here. This also gives me a firmer grasp of running this class, of all the spells available, and gave me a deeper appreciation of how powerful this class is. I think it's really cool. You're still going to have some problems, though, with trying to adjudicate the hypnotic spells. Maybe some of the mental, too. Like the, let's see what's a good example here. Like the illusionary hounds, or the fuck's the other one at? Or silent image, that's hypnotic. So the CK is really going to have to adjudicate when somebody does anything creative with silent image, and the second level version, which is a more powerful minor image that adds sounds and smell to it. There's a whole bunch of articles and YouTube videos on the internet about adjudicating trickery of the mind type illusion spells, which will be very helpful in running the game. But at least we know from this video that some of these spells, there is none of that. These are hardcore, arcane, magic, physical spells, real items that are not fake, real damage that doesn't go away just because you disbelieved it. At least this video pointed those out. The rest is you pretty much already assumed before, but at least I hope you point out which ones those are. I can't really give you a copy of this spreadsheet because that'd be a copyright violation. So, if you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below the video. And if you have any requests for future videos of something I can cover in CNC, let me know. And I usually try to get one of these out every couple of weeks. So thank you for stopping by, and you have a good day and happy gaming.